All right, so let's talk about analysis symbols. Now, when we analyze a song, we use certain symbols, okay, brackets and arrows and whatnot, to explain the function of the chords and explain, how they're working together in a progression. All right, so let's go through a couple of those right now. We're going to stay in the key of C for right now. We're not working off of a sheet, okay? So just pay attention to the video here. This is not in the sheet. Okay, so if I start in the key of C and I have my 5 dominant 7th chord, okay, my 5-7 chord, okay. Now, 5-7 wants to resolve to 1 major 7. So it's a 5 to 1 relationship. Now, how we write that is if we have the 5 chord going to the 1 chord, we have an arrow going straight over from the 5 chord right over to the 1 chord. Now, this is in the music. You would see G7 and then C7. So we'd take an arrow above the G7 and we'd draw an arrow right over to the C major 7 chord. Okay, so it's a 5 to 1 relationship. And how we show that again is just that arrow, going right on over. Okay, so we go from G over to C with that arrow. Okay, all right. Now, another progression or extending that progression is the 2-5-1. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this as well. That would be D minor 7 going to G7. Going to C major 7. Once again, we're not talking about voicing, we're just doing very basic. That's, not really good voice leading. That would be better, but I just want to make sure that you can see it, okay? So this is more theoretical rather than, look at those cool chord voicings, okay? So D minor 7, moving to G7, moving to C major 7, okay? That is a 2 to 5 to 1. Since that is such a common progression as well, we have a way of, we have symbols that we can use for that. And what we do is we go from the D minor, all right, to the G. We draw a bracket underneath, okay? So it's like this. There's this bracket underneath. D minor, bracket underneath, going to the G, and then an arrow going from the G over to the C, okay? So D minor, bracket underneath, going over to G, and then the arrow going over to C major 7, okay? Now, anytime we have dominant motion, okay, now dominant motion could be anywhere. I could go A7 to D minor. That's dominant motion because I have a dominant 7th chord and it is resolving up a 4th, okay, or up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 half steps, okay, up a 4th. You can also look at it as down a 5th. It's the same interval, okay. So when you have a dominant 7th chord resolving up a 4th to a major chord, a minor chord, or another dominant 7th chord, that is dominant motion. Okay? So A7 moving to D minor 7 would be dominant motion. Now what if I did A7 going to D major 7? Still dominant motion, okay? Because it's a dominant 7th chord. Now, don't worry about if it says dominant 7 flat 9, sharp 11, all that. No, as long as it's a dominant 7th chord, A7, 13, A13, A9, they're all dominant 7th chords when you boil them down. Okay, as long as it's a dominant 7th chord and it's resolving up a 4th, that is dominant motion. Now, what happens if you have a dominant 7th chord? Let's take this. D flat dominant 7th going down to C major 7. Now, D flat dominant 7th going up a 4th to G flat major 7 would be dominant motion, like we just said. But now, in this case, we're resolving down a half step. We call that deceptive resolution. Now, deceptive resolution is any time that you have a chord that is not resolving to where it should resolve, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there because I want to come back and I want to start with deceptive resolution again, right? And I want to, just to make it clear for the chapters. So I want to keep this chapter mostly about the symbols, okay? So anyway, I will talk some more about some symbols, but the main ones that you should know right now are the dominant motion. You have that arrow going over to the resolving chord, okay? So if I had G7 moving to C major 7, I'd have an arrow going from G7 over to C, and then also adding on that 2 minor 7, so D minor, G7, C major 7, I'd put a bracket underneath the D minor to the G7, and then an arrow going over to the C major 7. Now the reason that I'm not going to write examples of this is because we're going to see it in the actual examples of the songs. I'm going to do an analysis, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scan the page, and you can download it, and you can print it, and you can see my analysis right there written in, and it'll start to make sense, okay? So I'll see you in the next chapter.